Procrastination, the price of action. Why your mind keeps overcharging you for getting started. Flint West reporting. Procrastination is not primarily a failure of discipline or motivation. Before committing to any meaningful action, the brain performs an internal price discovery process, estimating the effort required against the expected reward. The problem is that this estimate is frequently inflated. We hesitate, delay, or avoid action based on a perceived cost rather than the actual cost. Productive work begins the moment reality replaces imagination. Once the activation threshold is crossed, momentum builds, uncertainty falls, and the true price of the task is revealed. In many cases, the hardest part was never doing the work. It was believing the mind's overpriced quotation. Section 1. Everyone has heard the usual advice. Be more disciplined, work harder, stop being lazy. But what if none of those are actually the problem? What if procrastination isn't a discipline problem at all? What if it's a pricing problem? Here's what I think is really happening. Before you do anything meaningful, write the report, make the phone call, build the business, walk into the gym, your brain quietly does something most people never notice. It runs the numbers. It performs its own little exercise in price discovery. It asks one simple question. What's this going to cost me? Time, energy, stress, effort, uncertainty. Then it gives you a quote. The problem is, that quote is often rubbish. Sometimes your brain underprices the job. That's why so many successful entrepreneurs laugh when you ask if they'd do it all again. Had they known the true cost on day one, many admit they might never have started. This content is brought to you by Bobby Gigs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 2. But procrastination usually comes from the opposite mistake. Your brain massively overprices the cost of beginning. A 30-minute task somehow feels like an all-day battle. A simple email becomes an emotional event. The work hasn't changed, only the quote has. And here's the trap. You don't respond to the actual cost, you respond to the quoted cost. That's the difference. Section 3. Then something interesting happens. You finally force yourself to start. 5 minutes in, you realize it wasn't nearly as bad as your brain promised. The mountain becomes a hill. The quote was inflated. Every time that happens, your internal pricing model takes a hit. Your confidence grows, not because life got easier, but because you've collected another piece of evidence that your brain isn't particularly good at pricing unfamiliar effort. Section 4. Now look at momentum. Getting started feels like pushing a dead car. Everything fights you. But once the wheels begin turning, something changes. The same force that resisted you now begins working for you. Momentum takes over. Uncertainty starts disappearing. Reality replaces imagination. That's why I don't think procrastination is primarily a failure of discipline. It's a failure to cross the activation threshold. Once you're moving, you're no longer negotiating with your imagination. You're dealing with reality. And reality is usually cheaper than the quote. Section 5. There's one final lesson. People think waiting avoids the cost. It doesn't. Waiting usually finances it. The deadline gets closer. The anxiety gets bigger. The opportunity gets smaller. Just like debt, the bill doesn't disappear. It accrues interest. So here's the takeaway. The next time your mind tells you something is going to be painfully difficult, treat that quote like you'd treat a suspicious contractor's estimate. Don't accept it at face value. Ask for evidence, because the only reliable way to discover the true price of action is to start moving. Because more often than we realize, the hardest part was never the work itself. It was believing the quote. Flint West, signing off.